Okay, everybody, welcome back to Growth 101 through Growth University. This is Module 6, and we're going to be talking about activation. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of activation. So basically what activation is driving users to take the intended action that you wish them to take. This is not a passive component of growth. In fact, it's very, very active. And it's likely there's going to be one or more goals that are going to be associated with your different stages of activation when you're looking at this. Now, this is a very, very broad area of focus. Activation encapsulates things like product-led growth, customer onboarding, upselling, cross-selling, email campaigns, drip campaigns, sequences, triggers, and hooks, and so much more. I mean, this is just such a huge, huge, huge area of focus. In fact, at Growth University, we've got a growth lead that just focuses on this. So this is just such an important area that you'll want to focus on as you're trying to grow your startup. We're not going to get to everything today because, again, this is meant to be an intro, but I'm going to refresh some of these components and then introduce some new components to you. So if you remember EPAG, the endpoint acquisition goal, this is where there's the handoff between activation and acquisition. And so the last step of that acquisition process is what we consider this EPAG or endpoint acquisition goal. So with activation, we're actually going to be starting with that EPAG metric, and then we're going to be moving users through the rest of the journey. So think of EPAG as our starting point for activation. Now, since this is your starting point, this EPAG metric is really going to become your first step in what will become an activation loop. Now, there's really two other components that you're going to want to think about here. The first is what I call next step activation, and the second is what I call end goal activation. And we'll look at each of these in detail here. So next step activation is where the primary goal is to move people to the next step or the next stage of your user or buyer journey. Now, it's likely that there's going to be multiple next steps in this activation sequence or this loop that I'll show you in a minute here. But ultimately, what you want to be driving people to is this end goal. So the primary goal of end goal activation is to basically assist or help to get your customers and the people using your product to the end state of your customer journey. And usually that's some kind of revenue focused goal. Usually you're going for a purchase when you kind of get somebody through this entire activation sequence. To visualize it, I like to look at it like this, where you've got acquisition kind of on the top left here, and then you've got your EPAG metric, which is that first step in activation, and then you form a loop here. So you've got next step 1, next step 2. You may have multiple additional steps here depending on what your actual workflow looks like. But each of those next steps along the journey is trying to drive the user to your end goal that you have for activation. Now, there's some components here that really separate really great high growth startups and companies from the rest who maybe have a much harder time growing. So the components of great activation that I'll typically look like are these 5 areas of focus. Number 1, focus on the metrics that matter to you and to your business, and have a very well-defined process in terms of how you track those metrics and how you move people along the journey. Number 2, relentlessly focus on each step of the activation flow. If any single point of your flow is broken, then you're likely going to have a much harder time growing your startup. Number 3, be intentional. Have a point of view on your user journey. Now, I'm not going to get into a ton of detail in Growth 101, but with our Mastering Growth program, I do all sorts of use cases and case studies on companies that are very fast growing who also are intentional with what they're trying to get their users to do. And there's a huge difference between that and really having no point of view or not really understanding what you want your user to do at each step of the way. Fourth step is to leverage user psychology to create triggers and actions that actually work to move people through that customer journey. And the last thing really is to understand where you need to be in the places where your customers are hanging out. And I just call that being everywhere. And the fastest growing companies really are pretty much everywhere you look, at least in the digital sense. Common causes of poor activation include things like lack of measurement around your goals or not even understanding what your goals might be, not being proactive enough with the user, not having enough of a push or a drive for the user through the buyer journey. Maybe you're not experimenting enough. Maybe you've got too rigid of a process that doesn't change, or your product is in lockdown mode and you're not really iterating on the product to experiment with it. And finally, I see this a lot. We think things are working and we kind of get lazy. And that is often not a spot you want to be in. Again, the fastest growing companies are constantly reinventing how they're doing things, and they're constantly pressing on all fronts. So again, what we'll focus on today is the first step of this journey, really. And again, mastering growth gets into all the rest of these steps, but we're going to look at in some detail here, focusing on the metrics that matter and really establishing that well-defined process. So I'm going to show you an example here of a company called Miro. And you can see here, you can already kind of tell what they do. They're a B2B SaaS company, super high growth. They've raised a lot of capital. And they're basically a collaborative online whiteboard platform. And they're used for distributed teams. In fact, we use them with Growth University. So take a look at what they're doing here. Their acquisition loop may start in a channel like Twitter, where I see their ad up on Twitter when I'm browsing things around product management. And then I see an ad and then I click the link, and then they're trying to get me to sign up for the free trial. That's what their end goal of acquisition and activation really is. So the whole flow here from Twitter, you see the ad to the landing page. Now they're focused on getting you to sign up for free. Watch how they pull this off though. This is the actual homepage. So you scroll and there's already use cases and examples. They tell you how to use the product. It's trusted by 7 million plus people. There's a lot of confidence at play here. They show you all the integrations. They're calling modern day pioneers. I mean, they really have a point of view with this. Social proof, sign up free. Now they are relentlessly focused on that sign up free. Now, what's even more interesting is once you sign up for free, once you get into that activation flow, or what most folks will refer to as onboarding, you're going to see a number of screens. The first screen is going to ask you for your name, work, email, and a password. And it says get started here for free. But notice what they do here. You can also sign up with all of these other social logins. You can also basically start to understand what some of the things that you get for free are, because they call it out here. The next step, they ask you to set up your team. So enter your team name, choose your role in the company, and then they get you to tell you a little bit about their company size. Now, they also make it easy for me to invite anybody with my domain name here to basically get started and to go through the same process. I click continue. Now it asks me again to invite teammates, invite from Slack. I can email my Gmail contacts. I can copy a link and drop it into Slack. I can drop emails in and send invitations. And then they get me into what do I actually want to do with the product? And these are kind of user flows within their product. And they actually get me in using it to the point where I choose a template and then I'm actually live using the product. Now, again, to close the loop, EPAG is their free plan. That's what they're trying to get you to do after acquisition kind of does this handoff. The next step of the journey is they're trying to basically get me through to create one board or to invite a teammate. When I invite a teammate, they go through the same process and they invite a teammate and they create a second board and then a third board. And what's brilliant about this pricing strategy and the constraints that they use during onboarding is that once we get to 3 users, we now have to upgrade our plan in order to do more stuff with the platform. So that's how they actually leverage constraints to build internal growth loops that you use with your team to get your team using the product. And it works amazingly well because you can only have these 3 boards live at once, right? So again, by creating a board through onboarding, you have 2 boards left. You invite a teammate, you likely get to 3 boards really, really, really quickly. And it may even happen on day 1. And then there's all sorts of other constraints. So if you want to upgrade to use projects, right now only 1 project can be created at once. Again, when you invite more teammates in, all of a sudden the use case goes from you using it solo to your team using it. It's a different pricing structure. It's a different tier. Now you're on the paid plan and there's different needs that you have. But they were relentlessly focused on getting me into the onboarding process. And then they were elegant and simple in how they actually presented the screens to get me to invite other people in. And this is one of the reasons why they're really successful. Boards are open to teammates here. And if we want privacy on these boards, we have to upgrade, right? And so there's just so many different areas where they're bumping me up against the constraints that their free plan has, but they successfully got me into the plan. Again, templates are locked. So you're getting the point here, hopefully, where they're just every step of the way, they're trying to get you to bump up against that activation constraint so that you get out your credit card and you actually click that blue upgrade button. And then, by the way, over time, they send you drip campaigns over email. They send personalized onboarding. You get a note from the CEO of the company. I mean, all of this is pre-written. It's all just a sequence, but it works really well to stay top of mind. Then you keep getting more team pushes. They're just relentless. As the account owner, I get these, invite my team, more and more and more. And then again, getting me to this end goal where they just push me to upgrade. I mean, they hit me 20 times over the first few weeks when I was initially kicking the tires with this product. And again, their focus there on driving to those constraints while adding value, while still letting me use the product and use the product with my teammates. I absolutely love what they do. The next area of focus here is tracking activation metrics. And again, we cover this in a lot more detail in the Mastering Growth program, but basically, what you want to do is look at your EPAG and then all of your next steps along the journey, all the way to that end goal, and map them in a spreadsheet and track those conversion rates between each step. And what you want to do is make sure that week over week, you're getting more velocity and you're getting better at those conversions and you're driving more conversions. And so these are some sample metrics here that I use as if I was inside running the growth team at Miro. So you want to take this and kind of massage this however way it makes most sense for your startup. But this is how I would think about activation cohorts and starting to think about, well, what's happening week over week as we acquire customers and move them through the journey. Now, if you can't track all this yet, you don't have the tools to do cohorts yet, don't worry. Just track your data. Know that over time, you're going to want to get more and more sophisticated, but it's better to get something down than nothing, and it's better to track something than not track anything at all. Over time, your metrics will start to normalize and you'll start to be able to make really great decisions based off of what you're learning. I'll briefly touch on user psychology and value action reward loops. So basically, this is, again, a whole section that we cover in Mastering Growth, but the way user psychology works with activation and sequences and some of the stuff we get into with product-led growth is that users get an initial value from the product that drives an action, which gives them a reward, which drives another action, which results in some kind of output. And so in the main program, I walk through Chipotle and Spotify and other kind of more down-to-earth startups in terms of use cases and looking at these value action reward loops. But I want you to start thinking about this mindset of at each step of the journey, what is the initial value that you're creating? What is the action that you want the user to take? What's the reward that they get? What is that drive? And then ultimately, what's that output? And so if you reimagine this as Miro, that output is an upgrade, right? Where the different steps in the journey all kind of culminate in that output, which is you upgrade to their plan that's paid. In terms of triggers, again, this is a broad topic, but there's really a few types of triggers: action-based, time-based, value-based, emotional, scarcity, some kind of combination. And when we talk about triggers and sequences and drip campaigns and notifications and alerts and all of this great stuff, what we want to think about is that triggers will often come between steps of your activation flow. And I've plotted this out kind of linearly here. And it doesn't always happen linearly. We've been looking at a lot of loops today, but next step activation may be followed by a trigger, which pushes the user to the next step, which is followed by a trigger, which pushes the user to the next step, which is followed by a trigger, which gets the user to the end goal. Now, these can be anything really. I mean, these can be pieces of content, they can be discount codes, it can be pricing experiments that you're running, it can be value adds through content. Again, you're going to want to add value at each one of these steps, but just know more broadly that these triggers that you're going to want to establish using user psychology will often come between these steps of your activation flow. So that's it. I mean, that's a whirlwind tour of activation. There's an immense amount more that we can unpack here. If you like this stuff, I would urge you to take a look at the Mastering Growth program. And we'll continue the next module, which is retention.